Hello, this is chapter 16, over making arguments. So let's get straight into it. Okay, so let's start with the basics. I'm going to go through this kind of quick because these are just basic definitions. Argument presents a claim with reasoning and evidence. Okay, reasoning is the thought process of drawing conclusions from that evidence. So your reasoning, it's an argument's one thing. It uses reasoning, but reasoning is the thought process of, coming to those conclusions. A claim answers the questions, what are you trying to prove? So if you're making a claim, what does that mean? Evidence includes statistics, facts, credible sources, testimony of experts, etc. And then a warrant provides reasons or, justifications for why the evidence supports the claim. Okay? So, criteria for reasoning and evidence, deciphering between fact or fallacy, includes credibility, relevance, and sufficiency. So let's go through these one by one. Credibility. Okay? Y'all know what credibility is, but how do we distinguish credibility in an argument? Okay? Questionable statistic. If there is a statistic that doesn't make sense, be mindful of that. Okay? Be mindful of that questionable statistic that you're like, that doesn't even make sense. There's no way that, 51% of men do this and then 50% of women do that. Like that doesn't add up. Okay? Bias source. So this is something that, yes, some of you can say everyone is biased, and I might not argue with you, but everybody supports something. So if you have a bias source, so let's say that you are citing a source that is connected to an organization that donates money. They might be biased. Okay? So we have to be mindful of that. And we kind of have to do our research on who we are citing, because if someone has a stake in the end or a stake in the whole situation, that's going to play into how they react and the things that they post. Okay? Incomplete source citation. So that is basically where, and something that y'all need to be mindful of, that is where you don't give the full information of who you're citing. So according to John Rovi, 40% of people will contract the coronavirus in the United States. Who's John Rovi? Have y'all heard of him? Probably not. That's my dad. Okay? I'm not joking. So you can't just let out a name. Okay? That would be an incomplete source citation, because a name doesn't mean anything. If we don't know that name, if we don't recognize that name, how do we know that they're credible? Who is that? Okay? And then an expert quoted out of the field. Be mindful of that. I'm not saying that unless someone is an expert, they have no knowledge of anything, and your book isn't saying that either. But it's very different to, even the term doctor. Let's talk about that. Even the term doctor. According to Dr. whatever, blah, 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 blah. Yes, they might have a doctorate, but they might have a doctorate in history. They might not have a doctorate in the medical field or whatever, or vice versa, right? So we have to be very careful. And I'm not saying that there's a lot of people. I would argue most people wouldn't just go out and say, but I think sometimes these are construed because they want it to sound like, oh, well, we got a doctor to take part in this and weigh in, when the doctor was like, no, I'm not, we were just talking as people. Don't use my title to make it sound like I was weighing in on this, which I'm not an expert in. Okay? All right. Relevance. So let's talk about logical fallacies. I love logical fallacies. They are so fun. They are so interesting. Y'all have probably heard of these, but if you haven't heard of them, a logical fallacy is basically an argument trying to use logic, but it doesn't work. The logic isn't there, okay? Now, before we get into these, I want to say, and I want to clarify, that as we are breaking these down, it is so easy and it's so obvious when there's a logical fallacy. But please keep in mind that these are very, very easy when we're not looking for them to go over our heads and for us to feel like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I remember when I was in grad school in a rhetoric class and we were reading rhetoric about anti-vaxxers and arguments, and it was broken down. It was very interesting. It was broken down into like, here's the argument, here's the logical fallacy, here's why it's a fallacy. And y'all, and I'm not saying I'm the smartest person, but I don't think I'm an idiot. Even reading that, knowing that these were logical fallacies, as I was reading through the arguments, I was like, that kind of makes sense. Like even knowing that I was reading fallacies, they still can work. So again, as we break these down, I know that they can be very simple and like, oh yeah, well, no kidding. I would recognize that. Not always. Okay. These can be very, very powerful. And I think a lot of times when people use them, yes, there are those people that might use them on purpose and they know what they're doing and they're good at what they're doing. But I think a lot of times people use them and they don't realize they're using a logical fallacy. Okay. So let's talk about this. Ad hominem fallacy is just a straight up personal attack. Okay. A straight up personal attack. So, as I always say, I don't like to get political, but if I use we see these in politics a lot. So, if I use political examples, please don't think I'm for or against, like, y'all know how I feel about staying impartial with that stuff. Okay. But, I remember in the last election when, the Republican candidate, Chris Christie, was running, there was a lot of personal attacks about his weight. And that has nothing to do with, I'm not saying he would have been a good candidate. I'm not saying he wouldn't have, but regardless of how you feel about him, or if you even know who that is, someone's weight has nothing to do with how they would be as a president, right? So ad hominem is where you just put a personal attack about someone and make it seem like it's relevant to their, their character or their job or whatever. Ad populum fallacy is where something is basically popular. A lot of people are doing it. Okay? Or not even a lot of people, I'm sorry, popular. Think of popular. Ad populum it's a popular thing. So even if it's the minority, it's the popular thing to do. Okay? That can be really powerful because, as I say, I feel like all the time, but it never ceases to amaze me, our inherent need for inclusion as human beings. So I know it sounds very simple-minded to be like, oh, so again, it's not about a lot of people doing it, but it's a popular thing to do. And then we jump on that because we don't want to be left out. We don't want to be the idiots that aren't doing this thing or whatever. Okay. As for sufficiency, so again, credibility, relevance, and then sufficiency. Hasty generalization is where you make a generalization based on a few instances. Okay, so I think your textbook gives the example of there have been a few instances, maybe not a few, okay, but there have been instances of pit bulls being violent. Therefore, pit bulls are violent as a breed. That would be a hasty generalization. You are taking a few instances, or many, but still, and you are trying to frame it as if, okay, and generalize, well, then that means this about this group of people, or this about the, like the example I gave about this breed. Okay. Correlation versus causation is fascinating to me. So it is very hard to prove causation. What I mean by that is it is hard to actually prove that something causes another thing, believe it or not. So, and it makes sense if you think about it. Correlation means that they're related. Okay. But so let me give you the example of, does studying hard and working hard in a class cause you to do well in that class? No. And I know some of you might be like, well, yeah, that's what I've been taught all my life. So maybe, okay, so let's just say studying hard. We won't go into working hard because I could go on forever. Studying for an exam causes you to get a good grade on the exam. No, maybe you didn't understand the content. Maybe you studied the wrong content. Maybe you didn't spend enough time studying. Maybe you only studied certain things. I could go on. So you get it. So that is the inherent fallacy that something causes another thing, where it doesn't always cause it. It might be correlated. It might be related. It might happen sometimes. It might even happen often. But this action, this behavior, or whatever, does not always 100% cause this outcome. Okay? A few more reasoning fallacies. Bandwagon fallacy, if you guessed, you would probably get it. Bandwagon fallacy is where, think of sports fans, bandwagon fans, if you've heard of them, they just jump on the bandwagon, right? That's where you just kind of go along with what everyone's doing. So this is different from ad populum. Let's go back. This is different from ad populum because remember, ad populum isn't about majority of the people doing it. It's about a popular group of people doing it. Okay. Or it's the popular opinion. Bandwagon is more about a lot of people are doing it. So you jump on the bandwagon. Again, I'm not saying we're all sheep, but do not negate our human need for inclusion. We don't want to be the idiots left behind. We don't want to be, it can be scary to stand alone. So bandwagon is where you push that on people. Everyone's doing it. You should too. And again, we use this a lot and it can be very, very powerful. Causal fallacy, sorry, I need to take that out. That's the same thing that we just talked about of correlation versus causation. Okay. If it's in your final exam, only one of those will be the option. Okay. So causal fallacy, again, we just talked about in the last slide. That is the same thing as correlation versus causation. Either or fallacy, that is a fallacy where you frame the argument as if it is either this or this will happen. Okay. As if there's no other options. Either, again, I don't want to get political, but the only thing I'm thinking of, either we make college free for everyone or students are going to stop going to college. That's not the only outcome. That's not true. You frame it as that way of like, people are going to stop. No, because people are going now and getting into accruing a lot of debt. Okay. So that's where you frame an argument and it's a fallacy because you're framing it as in like either this happens or this is going to happen. And there's no other options. Yeah, there are. Okay. And then red herring. Red herring is kind of a distraction method. So red herring is where you answer a question by acknowledging something else to make it seem, and it leaves people feeling like you actually answered the question when you didn't. Okay. So maybe if there was a product recall and the CEO comes on and is like, well, and they're like, what do you have to say about this and this happening and these faulty whatever? And a CEO might be like, well, we are very proud of how we take care of our workers and we've been paying them overtime and that, and they go in. I know my example isn't smooth enough, but it really can be powerful because it can be so slick that we feel like we're getting our answer that we asked for when really, if we look back, we're like, wait, you didn't even answer the question. You just deviated. You just tried to distract me. Okay. So these can be really, really powerful. They're really, really fun to pick out. That's it for this chapter, kind of short and sweet. I'm going to post a slideshow that I'm not going to do it live because y'all can watch it on your own. But if you want to see examples of these, I will post a PowerPoint, a little activity that I was going to show y'all in class where you can click on these links and they are examples of these different fallacies. So you can see them in action because they are cool to see. Again, it's very easy for us to pick them out when we're looking for them, but they happen a lot and they can be done really, really well to where we don't even realize they're happening. Okay. I will see y'all next time. Bye-bye.